We are making a video on wing warps and how to prevent them on the assumption that you want to prevent them. If you want to use wing warping to your advantage, that's a completely separate thing. We are not. We're wanting flat wings that we offset to the right or to the left to keep the wings level during the bank. So our planes are built so that we can keep flat wings. The basic way we do it is to brace the wings at the tip with this the fence assembly, which is triangulated, so the upper wing and the lower wing stay parallel because this is all triangulated. The whole assembly can warp, but it takes a lot of force. So I can warp the whole wing, but not in a way that stays. And if you look, angle it so you can see the wings are flat. The wings do bow because the covering pulls at the structure, but the wings stay flat. And if I bow one wing, if I warp one wing, you can see the whole plane twists and it comes right back. So it's very stable. We like this. Some people like adding a little wash out or wash in to help with the turning. We don't. We're using offset wings. This plane has the offset the way we think is going to be best. We did different amounts of offset. It turns out a ½ inch when turning to the right is enough, and then there's a little more prop torque going to the left, so we need a little more offset to the left, and it's 9/16 of an inch to the left. That'd be a good start, I think, for any biplane. In order for this to work, though, we have to make sure the wings are flat, and we did notice a couple of things help. So, first thing is the covering. The covering is wrinkled. I bet most people know about that. So before you put the covering on the frame, wrinkle it. We found that wrinkling it 3 times is way better than wrinkling it twice and certainly once. So we crumple the covering up as tightly as we can in our hand, and we actually crush it, completely flatten it out again, do it again, flatten it out, and do a 3rd time to flatten it out. We found that it creates way more wrinkles that are less likely to pull the structure into a warp. And then we do it on a frame, a rigid frame, so we can pull the covering so there are no, like these types of wrinkles, you don't have any on the inner part of the frame before we let the frame down on the structures. We also built up the structures so that when we put the frame down, we're not pushing the covering down to meet the structure, which can warp things. The structure is sort of brought up to at least past the at least to the level of the frame. In our case, we actually wanted it a little bit higher. So we had a thinner one of these before. This thicker one actually works better. It's just a piece of foam, and we lay out the structure on the foam, and then bring the covering down to it, and then we tap the covering onto the contact cement before actually rubbing. Because when you rub, I don't know if you can see just rubbing here, it creates wrinkles. So we tap first all along the structure's edge, and then we rub it down. As far as warps, they do happen. We tape our structures down first. So I'll put tape along this leading edge and then glue the ribs. And then before we do that, we actually make sure that the sticks, so we sight down the stick to make sure that it's straight. So I'll bend this one just to do a demo. Oh, right. That one's too flexible. So this one is pretty straight. And you can actually buy them where they're bowed. You see how that one's bowed now? So if you get a stick like that, you can still use it, but straighten it. And probably the easiest way I just did it is to just take your knife and whichever way it's bent. And don't use the stick until it's straight. So if you buy a stick that's bowed, that's okay. Especially if you're buying online, you can't look at each stick. So look how the bow is out of the stick now, mostly. And then this stick, pretend that's the leading edge, we would tape it down to make sure that everything stays straight, and then glue our ribs on. And then when you take the tape off, that wing will be flat, and then it's just a matter of keeping it flat. It may not stay flat as humidity affects it, which is why we like bracing the wings at the tips, but I know people are having success just bracing the wings in the middle, which is less bracing and less drag, so I can see why they do that. As far as carbon for the leading edge and the trailing edge, if you get a straight piece, that's probably better. We had one Freedom Flight kit and the pieces weren't straight and we couldn't straighten them. Bending them didn't do anything. They went right back. So we tried to use them and we ended up not using them. We ended up using wood because we could control the bow. So that I don't know what to do about that. Maybe someone else can chime in. If you end up with a warp, it's still not the end of the world. So I built this little demonstration wing and I built it with a warp. I don't know if you can see it. If that happens, you can still get the warp out by mounting the wing mounts perpendicular to the, if this is the trailing edge, this would be the trailing edge wing mount. Mount it perpendicular. Do the same thing on the leading edge, and you can see mounting the wing mounts perpendicular and having them braced, you can adjust the warp. So when you put this demonstration wing on the motor stick, it'll be flat, even though when you let go, it's got a twist. But when you mount it on the motor stick, it'll be flat. And when you let go, see the warp comes back. But the motor stick is very strong, so it'll hold the wings straight. And then as far as the offset wing mounts, this is how we did them. They're not hard to make at all. So let's pretend this is the motor stick. We start with, basically we're going to have the motor stick straddled by 2 sticks of balsa. So we start with, I'm not going to measure anything, it's just to show you how it's done. This would be one stick, this would be one of the verticals that straddles the motor stick. We glue on a little horizontal piece that's going to stick to the bottom of the leading edge. So this part will straddle the motor stick. This part will glue to the bottom of the leading edge or the trailing edge. It doesn't need to be very long because it just needs to. I'm not measuring anything. Then you need a little piece that's going to hold the rubber band. It's going to anchor the rubber band. So this piece will stick up above the leading edge. So this part here will stick up above, and then you're going to put another vertical down like this, and depending on how thick your motor stick is, this gap here has to be the same thickness as the motor stick. So I just picked this piece of wood here. Again, I'm not measuring anything. Let's pretend that's the motor stick. In this case, there's a little gap there. So we would shave off a little bit of wood here, but I'm not going to bother here. It doesn't take long to make these mounts. And this will be soaked with thin super glue once you see how you like it. So this is a finished wing mount. So this would sit put glue here and here, and it would sit on the wing like that. And you can see there's a little piece that sticks up that'll grab the rubber band, and the piece that I'm holding is the part that straddles the motor stick. And then you can make a shim however big you want to act as an incidence adjuster. So our shims are just little triangles that we make. And we push it in farther. So this would be less, this is under the leading edge, this would be less incidence. If you push it in, you'll have more incidence. So it's adjustable. And we make 4 of these mounts. And this is what they look like on the plane. So here's our little shim. and we mark what we think is the best position. If we don't like it, we can scrape off the mark and make a new mark depending on what we like, because this changes depending on what motor length. And the wing can easily move back and forth to adjust the CG for different motors, and we mark the bottom of the boom. There's one mark, and you see there's an upside down L there, and there's another mark, and there's a little tiny R there, because this is what we prefer now, but we can always change that. And then when you're changing the wing offset, you have to pull this rubber band off. It's a little bit hard for us, but there's the rubber band, and it hooks on. So when you pull the rubber band off, you can just lift the wing off and move it over to the other side. And that doesn't take long. If you find the process of getting the rubber band on and off a little cumbersome, you can loop another rubber band through this rubber band to act as a little grab handle. We didn't want the extra drag, so we're just careful. Like I'm using this knife, I really shouldn't, but I'm using the back side of the knife. It'll pull the rubber band on and off. So if you're flying in contests, you might want to keep a little toothpick or something in your pocket that you can grab the rubber band with. But I hope that helps. This is the general layout of our airplane. So here's our flaring prop. We had build the plane so we basically have as little weight in it as possible, as little ballast in it as possible. Ballast to me is just wasted weight. So if we have a lot of ballast, we strengthen the weakest part of the airplane. This piece of lead weighs 0.1 grams, so the plane is very close to the 8 gram limit without any ballast. And you can see that the real thing about our design is the length of the tail boom. So this is I think 42 centimeters on this particular airplane. On the other one I think it's 40, and it just depends on how the little differences between the structures. That's why it's good to have adjustable wings. But here's our general layout. And we haven't been in the gym with these offset wings yet, but down here in our basement's big enough that we can do a half lap, start to finish is a half lap, and we can get a pretty good idea how the plane flies. And this modification seems to help. So as soon as we can get in the gym, we'll post a video of it. Hope that helps.